Horror Stories in York Part 8. 20th of March 1776, the last woman to be burned at the stake. Elizabeth Boardingham and her lover Thomas Akeney had conspired to murder Elizabeth's husband John. One night, as the married couple lay in bed asleep together, they were woken by the sound of banging at the front door. Elizabeth forced her husband out of bed to go and see who it was, but she knew full well that it was actually her lover Thomas at the door. She also knew that Thomas was carrying a knife. As soon as John opened the door, Thomas leapt forward from the shadows and plunged the knife into his thighs and stomach multiple times. He then fled the scene, leaving the knife still in John's stomach. John staggered out into the street, crying for help between gurgled breaths. When a crowd reached him, they were horrified at the sight that they saw. John was clutching his guts and innards that were now hanging outside of his body. He was so badly injured that he died the next day. Someone just happened to recognize the knife as belonging to Thomas, and so he was promptly arrested, and he quickly gave up Elizabeth as the mastermind behind the murder. Both were tried and found guilty. Thomas was sentenced to hang for the murder, but Elizabeth was to suffer a worse fate. Because she had upset the natural hierarchy where men were ranked above their wives, she was convicted and found guilty of petty treason. Her sentence was to be burned at the stake. She was brought to the Naves Mire here at York on the 20th of March, where the stake had been set up just next door to the gallows where Thomas was awaiting his fate. It is said just before she died, Elizabeth had asked Thomas for one final kiss, to which he publicly refused. Elizabeth was then tied to the stake, and a rope was tied around her neck. The executioner then began to pull on the rope, strangling her. She was dead before the flames reached her. The practice of execution by fire was outlawed in 1790, thus making Elizabeth the last woman to be burned at the stake.